Okay, so a good day and hello to everyone joining in, whether you are in Singapore or somewhere else in the world. Good afternoon from Singapore from myself. And welcome to the 5th edition of Digital Underground Connect and the 2nd all-virtual edition of Digital Underground Connect. My name is Rob. I'll be your host today, and I will take you through this session, which we hope lasts about 1.5 hours. So let me get my slides on. And so the schedule for today is that I will briefly introduce this platform, and then as soon as possible hand over to our two guests, our speakers for today, Holger Kessler and Karsten Runsdorf. And after that, we hope to follow up with a brief discussion on some of the issues that we have discussed today. Before we go into that, let me briefly introduce who we are from DU Connect. So first of all, on behalf of Dr. Victor Khoo of the Singapore Land Authority, a warm welcome. He is one of the main sponsors of the Digital Underground project and also involved in Digital Underground Connect. Also with us is Jakub from Bentley Digital Advancement Academies. And myself, I represent Singapore ETH Center, a Singapore research institution affiliated with ETH Zurich in Switzerland. And also supporting us today is Reginald, who is also from Bentley, who is helping us run this platform, and hopefully everything will go smoothly. So who are you? Well, who do we think you are? Well, this is based on registrations, right? So we have quite a sizable attendance from Singapore, of course. This is where we are based in. Nonetheless, also notable, there's quite a few attendants from the UK who might be interested or even involved in some of the things we will discuss today. Also, quite a few registrants from our neighboring countries in the ASEAN region. So a warm welcome to all of you. And I see that in the meantime, you have also been exposed to a poll to ask you a bit about how you interact exactly with digital twins or with data of the underground. All right, here it is. Sorry, I just shared it. So this is just the learning experience. So let's take a little bit of time while you answer those questions, and I already see the answers pouring in. And so what we see here is of course, I'm happy to see a good mix of attendance with quite a few surveyors, but also quite a few people who need or who use underground data for their work. Others as well, if you have anything to add to that, of course, yeah, please, feel free to share what you are doing. Now, before I introduce the DU Connect platform a bit, let me hand over the mic to Reggie to briefly introduce how this platform works and how you can interact with us as we present.
All right, hello everyone. Hopefully you guys can see my screen. So once again, welcome to DU Connect 5, Digital Underground Connect 5. Without further ado, let's jump straight into your interface that you see in front of your screen. So at the center is where the slides are. Videos will be played here as well. Video footage of presenters presenting will also be shown at the top area. I think you guys saw that already. At this cogwheel icon over here at the top is where you manage your sound settings, sound output settings. Beside the cogwheel icon is your full screen icon. Beside that icon is to minimize your group chat. So this is your group chat over here. Your group chat consists of chat, polls, and handout options. So for chat, presenters and yourself will be able to communicate with each other. The polls over here is for you to do polls as you guys just did. Handouts are for you guys to access documents and links. And last of all, this little icon over here is for you to have a separate window of a group chat. If you would like to, feel free to do so. So if you have any questions whatsoever throughout the webinar, feel free to ask it in the chat over here. I see you guys already have been doing it. And yeah, that's about it from me. Rob?
During any of the presentations to any of us, just ask them in the chat box. What we will do as moderators is actually label those comments as questions, so we can properly address them during the Q&A. So let me start with a brief introduction. Since we're doing this all virtual, I think our audience has expanded a bit, and for a lot of people, this may be the first time you interact with us, with DU Connect. So we are a community of practice. We're based in Singapore, but not limited to Singapore. And we like to contribute to reliable information of the underground. We come from utilities, but as you will learn, we like everything underground, and we think everything underground is important. It's about meeting, learning, and improving. So we like to expose our audience to new and interesting perspectives and insights from Singapore, but also overseas. We like to facilitate our participants in exchanging this knowledge, but also maybe coming up with new solutions for problems that you're facing in the field, and also just have a good time. It's important to meet each other and not just interact with each other through contracts or any formal arrangements all the time. And this is of course co-organized by the three institutions, the three entities that you see below: SEC, SLA, and the Bentley Digital Advancement Academy's Singapore Hub. And this is our 5th edition. So we started out in about 8 months ago now, in the Bentley office, identifying with a fairly small group back then the themes and challenges that we would address. In DU Connect 2, we moved on to discussing data capture technology, but also other requirements like the skills and knowledge of the people involved in capturing that data to ensure that your digital twin is reliable. And then we discussed a little bit about the future of underground construction, how that data may be used for digital construction and development. And then COVID happened. So we went all virtual, and we went to this webinar setting where arguably we lost some of the interaction that we had, and we are still thinking hard about how to get that back, even if we're stuck to the virtual space. But nonetheless, we reached out to a lot more people. So we went virtual, and we hosted Rob Martindale of the Colorado Department of Transportation, who shared a very interesting story about how they had established digital workflows to connect data and also share it out again. And now I will share a little bit of a diagram that we use to make sense of ourselves, right? So when we talk about digital twins, I think we often talk about integrated digital delivery. So we talk about the uses of project twins or operational twins for digital design and construction to be handed over to asset owners who then manage it further into their own systems. However, what we've also noticed that there are other types of digital twins that we are considering and that we're interested in. And let's call them land digital twins of the underground that somehow cover an area which may be a particular piece of land under one's purview, or maybe a city or even a country. And of course, there's an exchange, or there should be an exchange between these two or three digital twins. And going to the top left, right, originally we were talking about infrastructure assets, but we've also realized that another very important asset to consider is, of course, that of land itself, which has its own life cycle, which does not necessarily align with the infrastructure that goes in or underneath, but the two are related somehow. And bringing that back to what we've learned so far, I think I've just noted down 3 main sort of key takeaways of each of those sessions. So for DU Connect 2, we really see that you need standardized practices, the human capacity as described in our example from Australia, but also good technology as shared by Otto Ballantyne from Reduct to capture the good data. For our third event, I think the main interesting conclusion is that even though underground construction projects are beneficiaries of good data, we also could think about how they could provide good data, because they are the ones often digitizing a lot of the records, capturing a lot of data on site. And there's a fantastic opportunity to capitalize on that and to make our existing data better. And then I think one of the key points again is the idea of underground space as a valuable but extremely scarce asset. This was echoed, I think, in our first session by the municipality of Rotterdam, but again, in the fourth session by the Colorado Department of Transportation, where an administrator of the land might say, well, my land is so precious, I need to make such important decisions about that land. I need good data, and I will enforce the capture of good data and collect it myself, even in some cases. These are just some highlights. We generally try to capture whatever we learn, and you may find some of the summaries or video recordings or even some interviews with the speakers on our duconnect.org website. So that's just a little bit of background and a nice way for me to sort of segue into the main content of our session today. And you know what we've realized, if we look at all of this, we realize that good data has tremendous value. And I quote some of the work that the speakers have been involved in as well in 2017, that it's really not about the business case. It's almost too obvious. You have to build it anyway, but there's so much value if you get good data all across the board for these different applications, different use cases. The question becomes more, how can we unlock this value? And what we will learn today, I think, is a very interesting project from the UK, which has recently, I could say, completed its pilot phase, in which explorations were done on how to unlock that value. From a high level, from the government, from a policy level, this was started and brought all the way down to a pilot, the technical platform that was implemented. And both, I think, the high level, the policy level, and the technical level, we will learn quite a bit about today from our speakers. So with that, that ends my brief introduction, and then let me introduce the first speaker of today. So I'm welcoming to the floor Mr. Holger Kessler. He joined the British Geological Survey in 1998 with a degree in physical geography and soil science from the University of Frankfurt in Germany. For the beginning of his career, he was employed as a geological surveyor, mapping glacial deposits and landscapes in North Norfolk and Yorkshire. Currently, he's on full-time secondment to the Geospatial Commission at the Cabinet Office as Geoscience Technical Advisor, shaping the UK's first national geospatial strategy. So I will now mute myself and welcome Holger. I will activate your slides.
Thank you very much. Great introduction. And we are somehow on this. Just going to go back to the slide pack. Yeah, so good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. Really pleased to be here. I've joined 3 previous sessions, and honor to be able to present to you together with Carsten our outcomes and next steps of the UK's National Underground Asset Register. So we have a split presentation. We're going to put them, we're going to give them one after the other and take questions, obviously, in the chat as we go, but Carsten and I will take questions after both presentations. The work I'm presenting was carried out in partnership with the Mayor of London, that's the Greater London Authority, and the Ordnance Survey as our delivery partners. Just a quick slide on the Geospatial Commission itself. We were formed inside Cabinet Office in late 2017 as an expert committee. We are now 50 people strong, and we are setting the UK's geospatial strategy, and the whole purpose is about unlocking value from geospatial data. And our homepage has an increasing amount of publication and policy and guidance. If you search, we are on Twitter and LinkedIn. And for example, here on the right, we are dealing with public sector geospatial agreements with the Ordnance Survey. We are looking into linked identifiers, into fair access to data. So we do a lot of baseline, and we're looking at availability of air photography for the country. We're looking into areas such as housing and planning. And in the center there, we intervened a year ago with a specific program of work to look into the availability of data on underground pipes and cables, launched by the then Minister for Implementation, Oliver Dowden, here together with the Chief Executive of Northumbria Water Group, and Clive, who's on the chat, which is great, in April 2019. To quickly mention why I am at the Geospatial Commission, I work for the British Geological Survey, and we are one of the 6 partner bodies of the Geospatial Commission. And those are, as in Singapore and in many areas, some of the key agencies who hold data about the above and below ground. And very much Project Iceberg that was referred to was all about a start to say, look, we need to really think about the surface, the above ground, the economic data, the land data, the value of that data combined with the subsurface. So we have the Coal Authority, for example, BGS, Hydrographic Office, Valuation Office Agency, Land Registry, and Ordnance Survey as close partner bodies. And I am seconded on a full-time basis to lead in particular, the stakeholder engagement on the underground asset register. This is a slide outside my front door, literally, and below that, a picture I've taken in ways than others. I think Carsten will repeat this slide. This is a current current state of affairs. We have this is showing the same area in the northeast of England, different symbologies, different scales, different orientations even, and it takes just a very long time to make sense of this data. Often it exists digitally, but then it is shared as digital paper, PDF, and it is just a very cumbersome process for people who work on the roads to compile and get ready to go to work, especially if you are in some sort of emergency repair situation. What is equally frustrating is that we continuously map and spray the information onto the ground and carry out extremely detailed surveys, both geophysical surveys or as built surveys. And the technologies are getting better and better, but the data is not fed back to the central databases in the respective utilities. So it's a huge amount of money and time spent mapping the utilities. And as we heard from Colorado in the last session, we need to get much better in encouraging or incentivizing or even mandating the utilities and the undertakers of roadworks to improve the data. If we get asked why we are doing this, these are the 2 striking images. The one on the left is a rotary drill drilling into the I think it was the Northern Line in London. So a piling rig, not considering the tube, and this was a real near miss. The train driver saw the drill bit in time. And the one on the right, which I do have permission from the author on Twitter, kindly posted this picture of a rotary drill, again ripping up telecommunications cables for hundreds of meters and causing, I think, 4,000 households to be disconnected from the internet just before Christmas. So the case for understanding, sharing and creating better quality access and better quality data about the underground is very, very clear. We have looked during the research phase at a whole series of other systems, including Singapore. We interviewed people in Singapore, in Hong Kong, in the United States, in Finland, and these three particular systems were looked at quite closely. So we do have in Scotland a existing underground asset register run by the Roadworks Commissioner, and in particular, standing out, we have Belgium and the Netherlands with a mandated system, which unfortunately, as it always happens, was the consequence of a serious incident with a gas pipeline. So we've learned a lot from our colleagues and now almost friends very nearby, and we are very grateful for the sharing of lots of knowledge with these organizations. And we're hoping that this forum, DUConnect, contributes to exactly that we all learn from our positive and also from our mistakes. So very briefly, the key here is that the underground asset register is focusing initially on just 3 main sources of value that we've costed in the business plan, and that's all about strike avoidance and the related inefficiencies that I mentioned in compiling the packs, sending the packs out, orientating yourself on the site, and the related delays. We are not immediately dealing with a whole bunch of other use cases. I've got a slide on that in a little moment. We are in a preparation phase in the project now. We have completed the pilots, and we're heading for engagement with the markets, and eventually for a tendering exercise, an open tender, and then a regional build, eventually a national rollout of the system. Being mindful, of course, of the fact that in Scotland we already have an existing system for the roads. So the 2 pilots. So the overall program was called NUAR. We had 2 sub-pilot regions: the London Underground Asset Register and the North East Underground Asset Register. And here you can just give a quick view of the geography. So very densely populated central London with all sorts of particular issues in terms of sensitive assets, and then a much larger region in the northeast of England, including very rural uplands, but also some very, very dense cities. The list here is just to give you a good impression. One of the main successes of the pilots was we had fantastic stakeholder engagement, both grown from the already existing initiatives in both areas, and then with our involvement from the Cabinet Office and convincing some of the more resistant players to share. And eventually we had pretty much all the national and major asset owners and some small telco providers, for example, on board to share. Here's the equivalent list in the Northeast. So all of those asset owners and infrastructure providers, many local authorities, which we must not forget in all this, due to the fact they own the street lighting, street furniture, and also highway drainage assets. All those shared data, signed up to the same data sharing principles, and were involved in extensive use case testing, because the whole point of the pilot was not necessarily to build out here the most amazing technology. It was to prove our assumptions that sharing makes sense, is possible, and provides benefit and value and time savings. We also, just a quick one here, we also do align with many other HMG, sorry for the acronym, Her Majesty's Government priorities. And in particular, we think needs for economic recovery post post-COVID. So there is a lot of talk about getting infrastructure, construction, transport, 5G, fiber rollout, electric vehicles, and to stimulate the economy. And we hope that an underground asset register is an important component of that. This is the team. This is when we still had real meetings at 100 Parliament Street. So we have a mixture of data experts, domain experts, experienced project managers, geologists, and in the room there, Carsten, of course, and Karen from the Ordnance Survey, and Molly and Christiana from the Greater London Authority. There's a small blog there describing who we are. So a diverse, experienced team from different backgrounds with different experiences made a big difference to the success. And as I said, partnering with competent authorities and national agencies and their existing fantastic stakeholder networks. We also had an advisory group, which again, we deliberately were very inclusive in terms of all parts of the United Kingdom, our Dutch and Belgian colleagues, Jeff Seiss there on the screen, pioneering video conferencing just by himself in the first meeting, and a lot of academics from across the United Kingdom and professional bodies represented with a vast amount of experience of previous initiatives, previous attempts. So we have learned really, really importantly the lessons of why previous attempts failed, and brought them all in and had, as it says there, avoiding groupthink. It's very, very important. So you don't run off with your own idea and repeat mistakes that have been made before. So this is the slides, and thanks for Rob for the previous mention of Project Iceberg. Project Iceberg is still active. There is a link also in a little handout. There is a link to the OS Iceberg homepage. This is our think tank, if you like, who considers all the other use cases, all the other sources of value that sit beyond the immediate use case of strike avoidance. For example, very topical flood risk planning, although we're in a drought at the moment, but as the extremes seem to increase, so knowing the existence of all the ducts and the sewers and their size and their state of repair is important for urban flood risk planning. We have the usage of space, and we have probably in the top right here, top left, one of the biggest emerging use cases, which we hear from everywhere, is the better coordination of street works, which is really where you can connect with all your friends and family in the pub, when we used to go to pubs, or in Zoom meetings, where you can engage with everyone because everybody understands the need for better coordination of street works, and it just seems to make a lot of sense. And there we are entering basically beyond the location of the asset, but also utilities sharing their infrastructure, their repair and maintenance plans, which is already happening to some degree in the Greater London Authority with their infrastructure mapping application. So, but we are very clear to our current, to both the Treasury when we ask for the investment, but also to all the users. We are not directly addressing these use cases in the first instance. We will be building on top of the Underground Asset Register to facilitate those in the future. So just a few slides left on the big challenges we found, and we have a lot of learning here to share with neighboring departments and related initiatives on the challenges to do with security, national critical infrastructure, the legal challenges, which are liabilities and license. Then finally, the commercial sensitivities, where because in the UK, almost all underground assets, apart from local authorities, underground assets are in private ownership. So there are commercial sensitivities around sharing networks, particularly in the telco sector. And we had to overcome a whole series of challenges, all the way from the publisher to the platform host, which in our case was the Ordnance Survey. So we relied on expertise in the cybersecurity departments, and also the challenges about the end user. What are they actually doing with the data, and how do they need to be whitelisted, and how can they be identified? So this is just one slide. How did we get around this? Very early on in the initial user meetings up in the Northeast, almost 2 years ago now, it became clear that we need to limit the size of access, the amount of access, and also limit the attribution that is required to fulfill the use case to roles, to specific user roles. So a utility only access to 100 by 100 meters of data at a time, and audit trails or an auditing system I hope I'm back in the room. Apologies for that. My Wi-Fi is up. I don't know what happened there. So we therefore wanted to just, I wanted to quickly just show that we are therefore striking a balance between the open data institutes on the open data institutes data spectrum. We're striking a balance between the closed part and the completely open part of on the data spectrum. So we have created group-based access. The platform will be shown not live today. We've just got some screenshots, but this is the prototype that was out for testing, showing a very busy junction here in central London. Clive will be Carsten will be showing some more on that. So finally, just the learnings, absolutely clear was that it's the technology is the enabler, it's the final tool that gets the data out to the people, but nothing is more important than an engaged and trusted stakeholder community who shares the vision all the way from the Streetworks team to the executives. We have to take commercial sensitivities and security considerations serious, but they need to be overcome. So we did not accept a closed by default. We had negotiations and we came up with role-based access and a lot of work on data sharing agreements. They are complex and they do take a long time. And we have luckily, through the hard work by the OS and the GLA, now got some very good templates, which we hope are useful for the future. My billboards just come down. A clearly defined use case that we're absolutely convinced that's the best approach to not have too much scope creep, which is what previous failure were caused by. The data and technology is ready. We're very impressed with the levels of digitization and vectorization at asset owners. Data conversion, data transformation was possible. Some hard work, still some open discussions about data model, which Carsten will of course go into in a moment. Testing in the real world is absolutely key. We had a very bad winter with storms. We were out, or the Ordnance Survey and the GLA teams were out and seeing what people on the road really face and what devices they have, and not just do a nice cozy test in the office somewhere. We worked really in an agile way, so Ordnance Survey pushing out quick releases and feedback, receive feedback and deliver results quickly rather than building 1 year worth of IT development, which never gets to testing. And also changing track. It's all part of the agile principle, close to the users, trusted users, and changing direction if necessary. Yes, and the feedback was superbly positive. We're about to publish in about a couple of weeks the detailed findings with lots of fantastic quotes from all the gas, electricity, telco, local authorities. So grateful for all the input of the community. And yeah, superb feedback received, time savings, and yeah, we will be publishing more on that in the next couple of weeks. So we won't take questions now. This is just a little view of the future if and when we have things. You have seen, presumably all of you on LinkedIn, more and more of the AR, VR systems coming online. So this is the future is looking very bright once we have data of quality accessible and shareable. So we will not take questions now as discussed, but thanks for your attention. And yeah, if you can switch across to Carsten.
Holger, thank you so much. And yeah, as you said, we will move straight on to Carsten. So I will now once again set up the slides. In the meantime, for the audience, I've briefly shared an article about the NUAR project as well, which you may download and read later, of course. So let me start with introducing Carsten. Carsten Runsdorf is a strategic proposition manager at Ordnance Survey, and he's currently leading the delivery of the Northeast Underground Asset Register pilot on behalf of the Geospatial Commission. Over the past 20 years, has been an advisor and technical expert to government and private sector organizations, focusing on value creation from geospatial data and technologies with utilities and data sharing as focus areas. So Carsten, please, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. A very good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Thank you for your interest. And what I would like to do in this session is to go into a bit more detail on the data sharing approach and what we've done in the background in order to enable this within the NUAR project. So when we talk about underground maps, let us start with a map of the underground here on the left-hand side, which I think is a map that many of you will be familiar with. So it's the tube map, a map of the London Underground, which is obviously a schematic view of the underground. It doesn't necessarily tell you if you would dig a hole where you would find an underground tunnel, as we've seen in the drilling example that Holger showed earlier. If you look at other more detailed maps, like the ones on the right here, so this is an example from OpenStreetMap and from an OS OpenMap product, you actually see that underground information, as far as the tube lines go, is actually contained in these maps, usually as packed or dashed lines. So that will represent a physical view where these above ground maps only go so far to hint at what might be underground, particularly in terms of the kind of bigger infrastructure, such as underground stations and tunnels. And I think what we found in recent years is that it's quite difficult to bridge these two perspectives and to integrate them and to enrich them with other types of underground information that is present. So if we go back to this image, so that's Parliament Square in London. We have Holger's office on the left-hand side. What you see here in this kind of made-up picture is that there's a lot of stuff underground which we typically don't see, and these are all the utility lines, the pipelines, the cables, electricity, and communications. And what we see here, and then for the traffic lights, for instance, is that there's a connection between the above and the below ground, because we can assume that the pole here, which the traffic light is on, will actually be fed by an electricity cable and by some cables that actually control the traffic light. And then we have plenty of other utility plant underneath which we don't see. And the idea behind the NUAR project is to bring all of this information together because it's usually maintained and created by a variety of private sector utility providers as well as the local councils. So what I would like to talk you through is a little bit about above ground data, which we already started with. I would like to introduce the cloud-hosted data sharing platform that was developed, go a little bit in time, a couple of years back to explain how we got there, and talk a bit about approaches and methodology. So on the above ground data, there are a couple of really interesting and relevant reference layers available. In this case, from Ordnance Survey, so that's OSMasterMap highways, which basically gives you links for these pieces of street, and what is called a unique street reference number, which is an indexing system for individual pieces of street which are signed by local government. What we also have is the OSMasterMap topography layer, which is a detailed topographic map of the entirety of Great Britain. And the sheer fact that pretty much all of the utilities, all of the data and assets of the asset owners use OSMasterMap topography layer to record their asset on a map gives us the opportunity to take the source data, the asset data from these different organizations and overlay and superimpose them on one single map. So Ordnance Survey as an organization has been around for quite some time, and I try to go back into the archives at some point to see whether we've actually done any underground mapping or underground maps before. And I found this interesting example, which is from the 5th of December 1917, and that shows trenches on the Western Front in Belgium. So we did some underground mapping at some point, and we also involved on the surveying side when the Channel Tunnel Rail Link was built years ago to make sure that the two tunnels that were driven from the French and the British side actually met in the middle. But this is really more about underground utilities, and what you see here is a real scene which is in front of my house, and I think that was in November or so last year when all the underground utilities were exposed, and we had a particular large hole in front of our house, and there was a gas replacement program where the old cast iron pipes were either taken out or lined with these plastic pipes that you see in yellow. And that, as you can imagine, caused quite some disruption in the street and in the neighborhood. Holger already showed this slide. So this is typically how underground information is currently conveyed. If you want to dig a hole in order to do such a gas replacement program, for instance, you need to contact all the utilities that operate in your areas and request the maps, and you typically get them either as paper maps or today more commonly as PDFs, but you will get a separate PDF for each individual utility type, and then you need to interpret these if you can actually find them in the van. So I talked to the guys in front of my house, and they couldn't quite find the one that they had for this particular area. So the data sharing platform that we build is really based on the principle that the data that we get from the utility providers stays in the ownership of the utility providers, and we just bring a subset of this information together. And that basically looks like this. We have a fairly straightforward user interface that we can where we can interact to draw an area of interest, which can either be a polygon or a circle, and then a query is fired against a data store, and the underground utilities in this area are brought up. This circle then can be moved, kind of if you didn't quite hit it, or if you want to know a little bit of what's further to the left, that view can be adjusted. This is the polygon view, and on the right-hand side, it shows you the type of assets, the type of attribute information that we can query for individual assets. So this brown one, which is a sewer belonging to Northumbrian Water, is shown here. So it gives you really quite a basic list of attributes. So it tells you the type, what it is, what material it's made out of, how big it is, and that's really the core of the information. this shows the attribute list for the gully that you find over here, which is owned by one of the local councils. And what's quite interesting is that for every single asset, we display contact details. And these are both business contacts and emergency contacts. So the business contact is more along the lines of if you have, well, some kind of feedback or some non-time critical questions that you can typically email somebody, or we have an emergency contact phone number, which is really more along the lines of, well, either you hit the particular asset or there's something really, really wrong and you need an immediate answer that you can, that you can get in contact with the asset owners and find out more information, as well as metadata in terms of the currency of the data when it was last loaded into the database, as well as the identifier of the individual asset in the data owner system. So you can actually refer to a particular asset identifier that the asset owner will recognize. Holger talked about the access limitations, and this is an example of that, where for certain user types, we only allow data to be accessed for up to a query area that's equivalent to 10,000 square meters. So if you draw a circle like this, which is just below 10,000 square meters, that is allowed. But if you draw a circle that's just above 10,000 square meters, this is shown in red, and as a result, no utilities will be displayed, and in fact, it will snap back to the previous map view if that was a valid query. So this role-based access is really quite important, because we're working from the principle that we need to give people the right information in order to do their job. And for this particular circle, that's really informed by the use case of, I would like to do an excavation at this particular point in time, let's say to do an emergency repair, which typically either has a circular shape in terms of the area of interest, or a trench that goes along the streets, and both modes are supported. So the security on the system is actually quite high, and the restriction to individual areas is one of the key security features as part of a role-based access model. So we have other user types, and these include back office planners who plan, let's say, a planned excavation for an entire street. They have higher access rights, and within the organizations that can be combined with a higher level of accreditation. So maybe these colleagues in the utilities will be subject to an additional amount of training or checking of their use of data in the system. One of the, I guess, most interesting features of the system is the ability to lodge observations. So let's say you're in this particular area, you do an excavation, and this particular water pipe, which in this case is from Northumbrian Water, isn't where you actually expect it. So what you can do with the system is to reference this water pipe and create an observation against it, and put a text in to say, for instance, the water main was not found in the pavement, it was found somewhere else. It's possible to upload a photo to set a very rough severity level, that's just a low, medium, and high. And then you can send this observation directly to the data owner, which is Northumbrian Water in this case. And what we've started to experiment with in the newer pilot is with this fairly simple functionality to bring out the idea that we wanted to implement a feedback loop from the excavators, the people in the field who are observing what's going on out there and how good the data is and how reliable the data is, to feed this back to the data owners. And then the feedback loop, we want to then close by the data owner basically giving feedback to the person creating this observation to, for instance, say something like, thank you, really good tip. We noted this, and kind of the next time we kind of sweep the area, we're going to fix it, or we fixed it straight away, or something like this. What we also want to find out is whether having all of these observations accessible and readable for everybody, for all the users in the system, what value that is creating, because it's obviously increasing the amount of information that you have in a particular area. And I guess if a number of users, a number of excavators confirm a particular scenario that there is kind of an issue with the accuracy of data from a particular type, I think that could give the excavators quite a good hint about the reliability of data in a particular area. So let me just flip back a couple of slides. So one of the things that you see here, which are not actually cables, so red indicates electricity, but these are so-called cross-section markers. So for these areas, a cross-section has been created by the owning utility, which is quite often electricity. And whenever you click on one of these cross-section markers, it brings up a supplementary image like this. So this is a cross-section of the ducts, and it shows you the cables that basically lie in the ducts. We have another data provider in a different area of the country where there are also these cross sections included that you see on the right hand side, but they are part of the actual map image. And this map image is not a vectorized map as you've seen on the examples before, but it's a raster. And we found raster data really still in some parts of the country. And one of the pieces of functionality of the system is that it's possible to superimpose and overlay a variety of raster data sets. Though if you overlay too many of them, which probably means kind of more than one, the map image really becomes very, very cluttered, and you really have to work very careful with layer control in order to bring out the information that you're interested in. So that should conclude the insight into the system functionality, and yeah, how we got there. And it might be interesting for you to know that we pretty much started in Singapore, or we actually started in a collaboration between London, New York City, and Singapore a few years ago with the Open Geospatial Consortium, where some of the colleagues as SLA, the people at the Fund for the City of New York, Ordnance Survey, as well as the Open Geospatial Consortium, got together to create this report on underground mapping and modeling, which you can retrieve at this URL. And this really asks the question about people's experience and problems and solutions and standardization needs in the underground space. And I think I'll just skip this and move to this one. What we found out is that we probably have to deal with kind of 6 different types of use cases, where the first 3 in terms of routine street excavation, emergency response, and utility maintenance programs are quite operational, whilst we then have other ones, large-scale construction project, disaster planning, response and resilience is in a particular one that came out of New York City's, as well as planning and smart cities programs, which have a much different focus. And I think Holger said in the beginning that we've really focused on safe excavations at this point in time, but we are very much aware that there are a variety of use cases that play out in the underground, where the type of information that we're combining is or could actually be very relevant. Project Iceberg has been referenced, and I bring this up again because it's a useful desk-based study. It's a report that basically brings together information from all the previous initiatives that were done in the UK in this field over the last 10 or 15 years, and I guess you can see that there were quite a few of these. So this is an example that there's a lot of underlying information that was already available to us at the beginning of this project. This one summarizes really the economic impact and the sheer amount of excavations and the funding that's associated with that. So interesting number, perhaps about 60,000 cable strikes in the UK per year. But the point in time when it really came together was in July 2018, where Ordnance Survey teamed up with Northumbrian Water Group in the northeast of England, and we did an innovation festival in which we wanted to create a shared map of the underground in a 5-day innovation activity. And the NWG Innovation Festival is really quite a special thing, quite a special event, where NWG as a utility has a particular ethos about innovation in their company, in their organization. And they bring together a couple of thousand people from their own organization and from others they're working with, some of their customers, together at this festival every single year. And we wanted to do three different things at this festival. We wanted to establish the technical feasibility. We wanted to discuss what the barriers for data sharing are, and we wanted to develop the business case. So we spent 5 days in this tent with quite a number of people there. I think we had 50 or 60 people in the tent every single day. A few of you might recognize my colleague Andy Wilson, who's been working with me in Singapore over the years quite a bit. And we really came together and scoped what this underground map should look like. And perhaps the most important thing that we did throughout the entire week is that we actually dug a hole, or we had a hole dug is perhaps the more correct term of putting it. So we worked with a field crew and interacted with them and found out from them how they were going about digging a hole and what type of information was actually useful for them. And that was a great learning exercise that informed really a lot of the future development. So from the utility perspective, there was a lot about trust and being able to trust the data providers, trust the community of data sharers to part with their data. We discussed how we can drive and increase data quality, and basically came up with this observation approach that you saw earlier. And we created a prototype of a system as well as the starting point for a legal framework. So before I finish, a few words about the approach and methodology. So there are quite a number of technical issues that we needed to overcome from a data integration perspective in terms of different data models, different semantics, different geometric representations. But we established a number of data sharing principle, which you see kind of the most high level ones on this slide. I guess the first one I've already mentioned. So the data custodianship really remains with the asset data. We don't want to take really data away from any of the utilities or asset owners. We want to establish the principle that you always need to share the best possible information you have about the underground situation. This sharing should be done to an agreed specification and data model, and really focused on the use case. So we want to pull out the data in a homogeneous way that really aid the excavators to give them the information that they need in the situation. And then on the user side, when excavating, the principle really is to always use the information that they get to start with and make an informed judgment about the quality and the reliability of the data itself. This is just a quick view of the system architecture, where we actually decided quite early on to follow a hybrid approach, in which from some data providers that you see up here at the top, we offer a data upload facility into a central database, but for other, perhaps the more advanced and bigger utilities, we would allow an API access in which the query of the data is kind of marshaled and streamed through and requested from the actual data owners in real time, and then the system brings it together and presents it to the end users. We did quite a bit of work on common symbology and data visualization, and you see a fairly strong colors as an output of this, which are really streamlined towards the use to make it easy to work with the data. Unfortunately, we don't have really that much time to go into the data modeling aspects that much, but we worked quite heavily with the Open Geospatial Consortium, where there's now an attempt to come up with a conceptual data model and encodings for this conceptual data model to bring together all sorts of underground information, which doesn't necessarily stop at utility pipelines and plant. It's also about groundwater utilities, soil, and perhaps some transport infrastructure. And if you're interested, we're going to have a kickoff meeting later this month. That should actually be the 19th of June 2020, to kick off the standardization work at the Open Geospatial Consortium. So the idea is to have a standard that can be a connector into all sorts of already existing pieces of data. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Karsten, for this this excellent and great technical overview. I think that went, you know, all the way from where Holger ended down to the details of the platform. So it's really impressive that both of you have managed to cover this this scope in your project. We will now start with addressing some of the questions asked, and thank you for some of you. I believe they are colleagues of Holger and Karsten who have been answering some of the questions. Perhaps let me start off with a question myself before we deal with the questions in the chat. So you mentioned the importance of building trust among your stakeholders as a key factor for success. Sorry, that's our youngest participant here. So how do you build trust? What have you done to successfully build trust?
I'll join this as well. I think engagement, local, regional, direct contact, whether that was in the hackathon, in the tent, in the infamous tent, through a lot of contact between the developers, following the sort of agile approach between developers, data modelers, and real world users in workshops, in user requirement sessions, through the testing. But then also from our level, we have created a very, very detailed and thorough stakeholder engagement plan from the Cabinet Office. Lots of phone calls, lots of webinars, and I think all of it has to be done in an open manner. So no hidden agendas and clear use cases, consistent, clear use cases. So lots of questions in the chat about other use cases, but we were clear and consistent, no scope creep, and we brought everybody on board with strike avoidance and safe digging, and being consistent.
Link up with a question asked by Shane from Leica, I believe. He asked, in particular, individuals may not want to share the private data going forward if they could be deemed liable. So do you have included liability into your framework, and how are you dealing with it?
Popped up in front. Currently, as we were only in a pilot phase, so we didn't replace any business as usual systems. So all data sharing agreements and user conditions everything stated very clearly that no liabilities are changed at all in the current project. Going forward, we now are commissioning some legal advice in the next few months to see if the hosting. So generally, the liabilities will remain unchanged for quite some time, but what are the differences with a platform owner, a platform host, with government and authorities taking a role? What might there be changes in liabilities? And then over a longer term, we do have international, obviously, exemplars where systems are in place and where liabilities might over time move from the lowest, from the front line back increasingly to asset owners, but that's not immediately on the horizon. Maybe Karsten, if you've got some.
Yeah, so I think we looked at liabilities quite strongly, and there's a fairly hefty set of terms and conditions which is currently associated with the use of the platform. And we took a view, as Holger said, that we shouldn't really change the liability perspective in terms of current business as usual practices, because we didn't really want to create any confusion in particular or potential conflict between the current liability situation and what the platform might suggest. So we basically mirrored what was already out there, and that's basically the collation of all the terms and conditions that the assets owners define in terms of the use of their data sets. We had quite long discussions about the the potential to consolidate these terms and conditions into a much slimmer set, and I think that's something that we should absolutely look into and do more moving forward. I think it's what Holger said, that liabilities might move towards the asset owner. In my mind, it's quite difficult to see this without some quite heavyweight regulation coming along, perhaps in a similar way that we saw in Belgium, where legislation was enacted where they really flipped the responsibility from the excavator to the asset owner at some point. And I think it's difficult to see how you can do this without legislation or regulation. And I think we want to follow, Holger, the fairly light touch approach to start with, and basically see how that goes. And I think that heavy regulation would go a little bit against this, but I wouldn't rule this out in the future.
All right, thank you. Let's move on to a question from Jess. I believe there's two questions that relate to the matter of whether you are just sharing utility provider data records or whether you're also obtaining data directly from site surveys, and whether or not that affects the way data acquisition and data processing needs to be changed.
So if you look at the data sharing principles, in a way, we really just publish what the utilities or data owners give us, and we basically say any acquisition is in the realm of the data owner. So they can improve their data, they can put whatever regulation, contractual framework in place, particularly with their contractors, in order to update their data. We obviously have started to implement this observation process where data can be, or observations can be shared from one user to an asset owner. I think there's another step by which survey information, for instance, if you do an as-built survey and pick up other utility types rather than the one that you've put in the ground as a contractor, for example, or GPR type surveys, I guess they could be shared in the community. But I would guess that we will start with this really on a much more local level than demanding this kind of foreign national system to start with. I think that's something that's going to be gradually be brought up, and I think that really that really depends on the willingness of the asset owners to share and work and trust that kind of survey data. But that's certainly a stream where better data is going to come in the future.
And just to re-emphasize there, and Clive is on the call, we've already seen just the fact that teams are now sharing and testing. We already have seen buy-in growing, and we hope that continue. As Carsten said, there won't be need for major legislation and a heavy stick approach, but that people just get it, that sharing makes sense, and you improve. This is something we've discussed with our economists. It's the effect of externalities, that you only benefit from the system once everybody shares, and that is coming through because everybody's now held in their hand the system to see that makes sense. A couple of related questions that I've just seen that are sort of directly linked. Yeah, so thanks for all the great questions, and we would like to capture those, Rob, if possible, afterwards. Very useful we've got some of our business analysts on the call as well. We will not immediately deal with the sort of deeper, the sort of 3D cadastre question and the other buried services and tunnels and shafts. Again, we've learned from previous initiatives, scope creep is one of the biggest killers. So we will focus first of all on gas utility and water and telcos and the local authorities. But we have, for example, worked with Transport for London. We are aware of their tunnels. We are aware of deeper sewers. We're aware of also geothermal wells and other underground obstructions. And this is definitely the chapter that will be opened up beyond the start. We're going to establish the newer as a start and then build out from there.
I received a message from Victor that he would also like to ask a question. So Victor Koo, if you hear me, please enable your mic and ask your question directly.
Thank you, Rob. Good afternoon, all. Thank you, Rob, for giving me this opportunity to ask question. And thank you, Carsten and Hugo, for the great presentation. I have a couple of questions. There are three that I would like to ask. I think first is related to governance and legislation. I heard from Carsten that you are going to start slowly. There will not be any new legislation, or there will not be any new governance that's going to come up. But are you so I think in the mid to long term, is this some of the ideas that you have in your review that we are looking into new legislation and new governance to ensure that we have the completeness of data, we have the quality of the data that we need? I think that's the first question. The second question is, of course, I also heard that the data sharing, you are getting the data from the utility owner themselves. So it is what they have, and you have a federated model where the data are shared through your platform to the rest. And while I work with ROPS a few years, and we know that there's a lot of challenges. So the question is about, what is the data model? Is there a standard in terms of the data model for this? Because the different companies, the different private companies are managing their data in a very different way. There are a lot of technical issues, and I'm not sure how do you achieve these standards in terms of sharing their data out, to the third party. So I think it's a data model, data standardization. That's my question. The third question is related to quality. I also heard that there is some kind of feedback loop in terms of the quality. If someone found that there's a new utility, and the utility is not in the place that can feedback, is this the only strategy that you have, or is there a more complete strategy to look at the improvement of the quality of utility information, especially with regards to the existing quality? Because we know that over the years, a lot of information about quality, about utilities are indicative, some of them, and it's very complex to put in a framework that would constantly, continuously improve the quality. So these are my three questions. Thank you.
I'll deal with the first. We are not taking new legislation off the shelf. It is potential, it's a possibility. But first of all, we continue in the spirit of cooperation and incentivization through peer pressure and showing the benefits. We also have existing legislation, which is the new Road and Streetworks Act, which could just do with a bit more implementation. So the Scottish Roadworks Commissioner, for example, has got legislation on the roads. We might also talk through local authorities, and the regulators do it through soft touch and encouragement. But we're hoping that we can rely mostly on cooperation from the asset owners to start with. And governance, absolutely, we will need governance, and we're looking there, for example, at options like a data foundation. So we will have a home department or a home organization which needs to be established, and we might be looking at a data foundation or a data trust to govern the data model and the use cases and access and so on. I hope that helps for now, but I can supply some information about that later stage. So Carsten, on the data model.
Yeah, so we put quite a lot of effort in the creation of the data model. And perhaps something I should say before this is that I talked a little bit about the Northumberland Water Innovation Festival, where when we went there, we didn't quite know kind of how complex and rich the functionality needed to be. And I think we overdid it a little bit in that we we created a Neo4j database and linked all sorts of kind of address information and stuff into it. We got a pretty clear message from the users, which was focus on the safe digging use case, don't boil the ocean, keep it really as simple and straightforward as possible for the end user. And that really informed the data management and data modeling approach. And we created a data model that really accounts for that. And I think particularly attribute fields that you saw on a couple of the slides, they're really a subset of the information that was given to us by the utility. So there's usually much richer information available. And we had another thought about the data model, and that was that the data model really needs to be open and understandable by everybody, and that's why we reverted to an open standards approach, where we looked at a draft model of the OGC's MUDDI or upcoming MUDDI standard, which was available about a year ago, and we looked at the data at the model that we created for the northeast of England to start with, and then try to express that as a profile, as a subset of the MUDDI model. And the view of that is really future extensibility, where we're fairly certain that we can then pull in additional constructs that are already defined as part of the MUDDI model into the newer data model if that is required. And Holger touched on it. The governance for this model it is quite an important thing, and there are certain recommendations that came with the data model of how that should be governed going forward. There's one last point on the data model, which is the concept of data harmonization, where, as you rightly said, Victor, every utility, whilst they all deal with kind of linear as well as connecting assets and perhaps some civil infrastructure around this, they all seem to manage their assets in a slightly different way. And we actually brought together communities of asset owners from our two different pilot areas. So all the water companies kind of in one workshop to agree what a harmonized model that everybody could agree with for water would be. We did the same for gas, electricity, as well as telecommunications. And so we try to draw out commonalities between the different approaches by the different asset providers. We also drew out commonalities between the different types of commodities. So there was a layer of harmonization, or there was an harmonization activity between gas and electricity and water and telecommunications, so that we actually call similar concepts the same thing. And that's a fairly well documented model as it currently stands. I think the third question was about data quality. Maybe I start this off. And then
and loads of questions about that. Yeah,
if that's okay. So I think there's a hope in there, and that hope is that the use of the data will drive an expectation, and that will lead to data quality. Now, we can't prove at this point in time that it's actually going to work like this, and maybe the pure carrot approach is not completely going to work, and a little bit of a stick needs to be introduced perhaps at some later point. But the idea is really that if you create a vibrant user community who use this data on a daily basis, who care about this data, who feedback their observations, and then you have data owners who act on these observations and really see how the data is being used, not only by their own field crews, but by crews from other organizations and contractors, that particularly in a well, local area, let's take the northeast of England or perhaps London as a local area. If you really pull the organizations together and create a community around this, which is what we've done, or which is what we've started with in the northeast 2 years ago, then we really have a chance to focus on data quality and can gradually improve data quality over time. So I think that's the underlying idea, but we still have to prove that that's actually possible, and we have to quantify what you can achieve by this approach.
Collaboration and community, and this is really true. So a question that I'd sort of clicked on answered: how asset owners view publishing detailed attributes in terms of commercial sensitivity and protecting income. Well, we have managed to get all the asset owners to share, only in the pilot, but we're hoping that with what we detailed with the sharing principles and the data sharing agreements, that we can overcome those concerns in the long term as well. School started on my table, so you might hear some background noise from now on. Rob, did you want to moderate a few more of the questions, or should we just go through and take?
I think you and some of your colleagues are doing a terrific job in answering some of the questions one-to-one. So I propose that for the sake of managing our time and that of our audience, we move on to the discussion session. Of course, we will record all the questions in case we feel something hasn't been answered properly. Of course, we will get back to the person who asked that question. I think we can say that. So guys, thank you for sharing this. I really appreciate it that you're able to do this at this particular point in time in your project, where I think it's really at the end. So it's really great to learn a lot about the outcomes, and there will be a proper time to thank you, and hopefully also in person once we're free to travel and meet again, and I'm sure we'll come across each other many times in the future. So with that, let me quickly share before I forget a few materials for further reading, right? So for anyone who has an interest in any of the projects that are covered under this scope, by all means, have a look at what I'm sharing with you right now. And then it is time for our discussion session. So I would like to ask Jakub to take over the mic and the webcam for the two speakers. Please stay connected as panel members. So please, Jakub, go ahead.
All right, thank you very much, Rob, and thank you for this fantastic knowledge sharing. I will actually hide the camera in a second. I would like Victor as well to come up on stage so we can have a proper Singapore, UK conversation. Before we do that, we talked a lot about the data quality and about actually being able to share and receive proper data. And we talk about stick and carrot strategies, about the fact that you might want to introduce further legislation, or you rely on the willingness of the participants to actually do that. My thinking here is the key dependency for receiving great data is really about not only trust them, but possibly stakeholders management, and also understanding who are all the different stakeholders in the game that should be supplying data, relying on data. So I wonder, what are your strategies in stakeholders management and engaging, making sure that all the different parties here in Singapore, we have a lot of agencies. There is some rivalry a bit sometimes between some of these. So I think that in UK, you might have a similar challenges. So what are the challenges, do you think, in terms of the managing stakeholders, engaging stakeholders, bringing them to the table, and incentivizing and sharing data and requiring data to be shared?
I'm really grateful for that question, because that is my day job. I'll start with the UK-wide picture, and then maybe to Carsten sort of at the regional and back to the tent, to the marquee event. From a from my perspective, it is first of all, to recognize stakeholder engagement for the Underground Asset Register is a full-time job. It's a full-time job. I'm doing stakeholder mapping. I'm using government guidelines on stakeholder management engagement plans. It requires lots of phone calls, lots of online and visits. It requires having good agreed lines of communication. Again, communicating the same use case. What are we doing? It includes talking to your critical friends, commercial players who are in the business. It requires talking to people who have similar initiatives, as I said, talking to people in Scotland. And the challenge is, it is a lot of work, and it is hard work, because there are 740 asset owners in the United Kingdom. There are many local authorities, there are many commercial, and there are many actors. So its first challenge is to take it seriously and to create a full-time role or more. And yeah, Carsten, maybe some thoughts more from the OS and the regional perspective.
Yes, yeah, so Holger, I think you suffered quite a bit from that, given that there's such a high interest about, as you said, to the stakeholder community, or there are a lot of stakeholders in this field in the UK from areas that you would expect, and perhaps from areas that you won't expect so much. I think if you look at it from a more regional perspective, in the Northeast, we started in a tent. That means we started with a community of people physically coming together. And what we tried to do over the last couple of years is to really sustain that community. And I think that's great credit to my colleagues Karen at OS and Clive from Northumbrian Water, who's also been quite active on the chat today, to really provide a focal point for the stakeholder community. And there has been a lot of exchange and discussion and co-creation and collaboration when it came to the system, to the legal framework, to all the aspects around this, where I think we move quite far away from providing an IT solution to solve a problem, to really let the community drive what IT can do to help in order to do this. But it's really only a part, a useful tool that you can utilize. And I think without the user community, it would have been impossible to get to where we've gotten to in the pilot, which is really an environment in two pilot areas, both in London as well as in the Northeast, where we provide access to, when I say reasonably high quality data, I think what I mean is that the data can be relied upon to a degree, and the excavators really need to interpret the data. But since they've always had to do this as part of their day job, I think they're quite familiar with that concept, which is making it much more easy and straightforward for them to access the data and use them in order to allow them to concentrate on their day jobs.
Thank you for that. So it looks like a community and network is quite instrumental to actually enable knowledge sharing and actually buy-in from various stakeholders. I wonder, Victor, what do you think the approach Singapore should take? What is your plan in terms of stakeholders engagement? How do you think, and especially if you think about, for instance, an example from the UK, where I've seen, I just learned that you are part of the National Digital Twin Initiative as well. You're engaging with a National Digital Twin, CDPB as well. So there must be a lot of conversations between various groups going on. I wonder, Victor, what is your approach, and what do you think we should do in Singapore and the region here? And in the meantime, by the way, I put a slide question to the audience, so feel free to type those answers to the chat, and we will comment on this in a couple of minutes. So Victor, stage is yours.
Thank you for the questions. I have been looking into this area for 2 years. We have been studying the different cities, the different places. So from the perspective of stakeholders, we understand from day one that it's very important to engage in stakeholders because what we are looking at is really a whole ecosystem, a whole cycle of data flow. And one agency itself, one party itself would not be able to accomplish this task. So that's why we know from day one that engaging stakeholders is an important task. We need to do it right. We need to be sincere. And of course, to do that, there are many aspects of it. You can engage your stakeholders from the perspective of policy, from a perspective of technical. I think it's also important to be able to engage technically with the stakeholders, and a few other aspects, standards, and so on and so forth. So we have to break it up down. Fortunately, in Singapore's context, because of the how the government works here and the government and private sector works here, we are quite we are simple relative to other places. We have one central government, we have agencies that works in the different area. We have the private sector that runs the that's a owner of the utility, except our water utility are owned by the government. The telco, the gas and the power are owned by private sector. So the model is simpler compared to other parts of the world. But having said that, it is still fairly complex. We don't really have a long-term plan yet, but in the two research work that we have done, the Digital Underground 1 project and the Digital Underground 2 project, we are hoping that we can put in place a longer-term strategy in terms of how do we constantly engage in the stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I've seen there is one answer to the question to the audience that the challenges in obtaining the data, actually there's some few others are floating in, are revolved around compliance towards data schema. So I wonder whether any of the panelists wants to take or comment on the challenges that are floating in from the chat room.
If I can try to answer this. So one of the idea that we have is that in order to develop an ecosystem where reliable utility data are constantly produced and constantly shared across the whole domain, standards are important, and we are looking at our other types of survey as a model. In terms of cadastral survey, it has been we have a system over many years that is quite rigid. High standards are required. So in a way, we are trying to learn from the cadastral survey system. In terms of standards, in terms of governance, in terms of the strategy on how to ensure quality of data are met. And that framework is where the basis of where we are looking at to put in place for utility survey. So from that perspective, in cadastral survey, there is a very strict data schema. There's a very strict way of doing certain things so that data are produced, are surveyed in a certain way, are modeled and are submitted, to the sharing portal in a very rigid way. I use the word rigid because when the data is in digital form, If you want to validate them, you want to check them for the qualities, you need it to be quite rigid in a way, and that will ensure that we have a system that ensure the quality of the data going in the future.
Thank you very much. Any comment from Carsten and Holger on this particular question here?
Not on a particular one. No.
So maybe on the so we haven't focused really on the surveying side, and I think what we saw in the DU Connect 4 when Rob Martindale presented last time was really fascinating, because it brought together the kind of existing asset records with as-builts and data sharing. And I think one of the developments that we're watching very, very closely is the American ASCE's as-built standard, which is emerging and should be out for comment quite soon. So that is something that flows into the OGC Mali approach, but that we're also looking at from a newer perspective.
So there is the second question here to the audience. If you can type the questions, I appreciate the time. I think we're going to spend another 5 minutes just because there is a lot of great knowledge exchange happening here. But what I suggest is maybe that we actually then ask some of the questions to the panelists and maybe put it back with Rob in a blog post later on following this session. But if you can, this is the last question, what are the impacts of not having the underground data available? So how does it affect your day job, your operations? What are the risks? What are the issues and challenges that you see? So if you can type it inside the chat window, and at the same time, in the meantime, what I'm going to do is ask a more wider question towards the end, which is, where do you see this evolution of the underground information management strategies and systems going, especially keeping in mind the CDBB, the Centre for Digital Britain initiatives in the UK, and also do you foresee some monetization models, business models revolving around, marketplace of data? Do you at least, are you starting having these type of conversations? Do you think that this will actually drive people to the platforms, drive people to use data and provide data of quality? And whether, certain commercial models of data monetization might help. Any comments from that? And in the meantime, to the audience, if you can type your impacts inside the chat window.
Superb, Jakub, by the way. Great idea that we could capture the questions, by the way, and create a blog or some resource in writing. If we could have some shared document that we could compile, that would be awesome. So yes, as Karen Hunt in the chat I saw just going up earlier, we have not yet in the pilots discussed the commercial models, but of course we are considering this, how the platform will operate and is funded. So in Belgium and Netherlands, it's on a as use basis. In Scotland, there are fees for asset owners to be paid. So we will come up with a model of how we will have to come up with a model of how it is funded and operated. And yes, we are hoping that at some point, and this is where the trust in both terms, the trust with a small t, but also with a capital T comes in, that if in the governance, we need to obviously take any decisions about commercialization of services with all stakeholders involved, because some of the stakeholders have already commercial services in the search provision, and we need to be very careful that we don't throw out the baby with the bathwater and destroy trust and end up with big problems. So slowly we might be approaching this. In general, back to Project Iceberg, I think your other question was, I think having an underground asset register, starting with the pipes and cables, will really open up the geotechnics, the geological, the geothermal, and the underground usage space, not say to the market in terms of capital and money, but it'll open it up as a thing. as a space that is still largely unhidden and therefore people are very unaware of. So CDBB, we're in their chats and in their chat rooms, and we're trying to influence them to think not just built environment and civils, but also connecting to the natural environment. I think the pipes and cables are the perfect route to connect soil and geothermal and water to the built environment. So I'm very positive.
Yeah, maybe one quick point on the CDBB, which is the UK's digital twin in the built environment initiative. And they've done something really interesting in that they came up with a set of principles called the Gemini principles for digital twin or digital twin type of data. And Holger and I discussed this some months ago, and I think Holger, in fact, you produced some material at some point where we actually have proof that the newer project in our approach, we are completely meeting the Gemini principles that we adhere to all of the I think 9 key ones that are being suggested and we describe in how we've implementing that. So I think it's fair to say that the implementation of Newer is one example for a digital twin, which may be a subset or maybe a participant in the concept of a national digital twin, which CDBB has brought up.
And would be great if we could dream, given the stakeholders in this conversation, Singapore and UK, maybe an international digital twin at one point of our journey. So in the meantime, what we've pushed here is the link to the registration to the session that our guests are running soon. Do you want to comment on that?
For the advert there, that's great. We're nominated for as a team to shortlisted as digital leaders. So you can vote for us, or you just watch the next presentation, which will be given by the Geospatial Commission team, and we will be including on that day a live demonstration of what you've seen of the prototype platform.
Fantastic. So, okay, what I would do is final statements round between our panelists, and ideally leaving us with a certain vision for where do you think these initiatives should go and are going, in what is the direction, what is the final outcome you're trying to achieve, and any other statements for the public. So 1 minute each speaker, please. Starting with Holger.
Worked, and it shows that we can connect around the globe quite easily. And I think the most important thing, whether it's to do with current crisis, long-term crisis, climate change, the COVID situation, or whether it's underground assets, I think it is absolutely essential that we continue to talk to each other and learn from the successes, but also, and this is one of my big pleas, to also share the failures and share the problems in an honest and open way, because hiding the problems is not going to get us forward in all those crises and opportunities. It's about being open, saying we tried this out and this wasn't the right approach, and recognizing also that each part of the world has a different governance and a different political and a different ownership model. So therefore, not just saying this is the only approach, there might be several approaches, but maybe what unites us and unifies us are things like data models. And hopefully what unites us is our joint quest for better and more accessible information about the entire Earth, and in particular pipes, cables, and the surrounding geology. So yeah, I'm thankful for letting us into this forum, and we'll speak more, and maybe one day we'll meet in person.
Pleasure on our side. Carsten, what about yourself?
Yeah, I'm not so sure that we really need to have a worldwide approach in terms of doing everything the same way. But I think what is really important is that we talk to each other and share our experience. And I think in that sense, it's great that you guys invited us in order to do this. And I think we can safely say that's an issue, that not having access to reliable underground data is an issue in many parts of the world, kind of roughly in every single country, probably in every single city or geography, which means there are, I think, patterns and approaches that we can share and need to discuss, and then the individual implementations I think everybody needs to do on their own. But I think from that perspective, working on groups like data modeling, so I invite you to have a look at what we're doing in the OGC. I think becoming increasingly important. So I would hope that we'll be able to continue this.
Fantastic.
Dialogue.
Thank you very much for this invitation. Victor, any final statements from yourself?
I totally agree with both Carsten and Hugo. I think the challenges, the issues that we are looking at are similar, but yet the approach to tackle these issues, to look at mid to long term solution are quite different from places to places. The reason is because we may be starting from the different base, right? And also the motivation behind each cities and each places are quite different as well. So we understand that mid to long term, if the cities are going fully digitalized, there's no way we don't address these issues. We definitely need to move to digitalization in terms of information, because this is one very important information in our built environment, and a very important puzzle. Besides the above ground, the airspace, underground is a big piece of puzzle that we need to solve. So with that, I think it's important project for every cities, and in order for us to understand more, in order for us to know how to move forward, because this is related to technology, this is related to databases, this is related to policies. We really need to constantly keep in touch and try to share knowledge in this kind of platform. So thank you both speakers for coming up to this platform. Thank you.
Fantastic. So in a nutshell, what you've seen from the speakers, that we definitely need to digitize both above ground and below ground. We definitely need to collaborate. We might have different approaches for doing so, for digitizing the ground, but we definitely need to do so. So thank you for discussions, for fantastic collaboration here, exchanging information, knowledge, experiences. I will give floor back to Rob for closing remarks. Thank you, everyone.
Let me talk over the snoring here. So also from my side, I think, of course, I studied your initiative, but once again, I've learned a lot more, and I think this is just another, great example of how we can learn. But I think also, and of course, we will share about the Singapore situation as well, how we can complement each other on various aspects. And I'm looking forward, for example, to also engage with you guys through the Muddy working group as well, to see how we can really help each other. So please, thank you, speakers, first and foremost. Thank you, Victor, also for joining in. Thank you, Jakub and Reggie as well from Bentley for supporting this event. But most importantly, thank you also the audience for your participation and not just listening in. And we really care a lot about your opinion. So I'm Dutch. You can be as straight as you can be to my face about what you think about this platform. So please take a moment, give us a moment of your time to give us some of your feedback and tell us how we can make this better. with that, I have no more things to comment, and I will close this session soon. So thank you all for attending, and see you soon.
Stay safe and sane.